You know what it is. That's right. It's time to talk money with your money nerd and financial coach. Now, tighten those purse strings and open those ears. It's the Money Talk with Tiff podcast.
Yeah, Twitter has some interesting. I think they give you like three or four choices. I was gonna try what Anthony said, but I'm not near my roadcaster.
The funny part is I've been waiting for the big glitches in the app with all that employee shit, but hopefully that don't get us shut down.
Well, don't speak it up now. But yeah, I mean the app still's been running pretty smooth from what I can see, so I think we're good. So how are y'all doing this good Monday?
I'm doing pretty good. Just hooked up to the roadcaster for you. So,
Go ahead and rub it in, why don't you? No.
I mean, I got you. You want some man who wants to get you started? I mean, what you got? What you what?
It
What's
doesn't
up?
see what I'm talking about.
Wow,
You are dedicated
that's
sound
next
effects tonight.
level.
Hey, let's make it happen.
What's Gucci, y'all?
Hey, Rahkim, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So we just upped our game by times 10 because Anthony's gonna hit us with the sound effects
Oh,
tonight.
I heard. I heard.
Oh no, don't do that.
We got what's his name? Funk Master Flex, DJ Envy. All them old school New York DJs.
And you gotta have the Funk Master Flex. That is hilarious. All right, cool beans. So we'll get started in a few minutes. We'll give people some time to get in
What we
and
chatting
get.
about today?
We are. You can't wait. No, I'm just kidding.
Dang.
We talking about online versus traditional banking. Does technology erase inherent bias? Hmm.
Mmm.
Hmm.
Shout out to Markia for the topic.
Yes, yes.
Hey y'all. Hey
Speaking of, hey Markia,
y'all.
how you doing? How you
Girl,
doing?
drowning.
Oh
If
no.
anybody told me being an adult would mean I'm like I have no personal time to myself, I really would have asked my mother to take me out a long time ago when she threatened me.
Oh.
No, seriously, like I got caught in some loop over the last couple of days of a whole bunch of 20-year-olds saying I hate work and I hate working a 9 to 5. I'm like, you only been working like 2 years. I want to do my passion. I'm like, okay,
I
that's
love my
cool,
job.
but
Don't
do
get me wrong.
you?
I love my job. Like I literally I'm living my dream job. However, like
However, dash
I'm not
dash.
used to I'm not
Comma.
used to working. Like I was retired. I didn't have no fucking boss. So, I'm sorry. I didn't have no boss. So like to go from not reporting to somebody and just being able to like not do stuff I don't want to do to like now I do have a boss and I have to learn how to talk to people all over again and like navigate office politics. It's exciting because it's a whole new world for me. I feel like Aladdin, but it's still kind of it's like a culture shock a little bit.
Sounds a bit tragic.
Yeah, the politics are very, very interesting. But, navigate. Navigate. We could do a whole space on that
Tough,
actually if we want to.
tough,
Office politics.
Add it to the list.
right? Office politics for Black people.
Yeah. And how to navigate efficiently.
And then we all got to go listen to Rahim's podcast to heal from what we just went through.
I should do a whole damn episode on that.
All right, y'all. We're gonna go ahead and get started because we about 6 minutes in now. So this is Fin Noir, Space for Black Money Talk. My name is Tiffany Grant. I run the Money Talk with Tiff podcast and platform where we educate Black and Brown communities on financial wellness. Rakim?
And I am Rahkim Sabree. I cover financial trauma and financial empowerment for people who look like me. I run Overcoming Financial Trauma podcast and newsletter and a bunch of other stuff.
My name's Markia. I am a TikToker, parent, and apparently teacher. I'm back homeschooling my kids, y'all. And I make personal finance content for Black people.
Thank you. And Anthony?
My name is Anthony, and I am the host of the About That Wallet podcast, where we help you build strong financial habits.
Oh,
The
and out
way
here trying to
I
shut everybody up
am.
with the theme
Wow.
music.
The way I
You
am
definitely should
dying
have went
right
With the
now.
last.
theme music. I'm about to come. I'm about to
Anthony.
come up with the
Oh,
theme music the next time. You what?
this is what we own?
Hey! You know, gotta do it.
He sounded like he was a wellness spa just waiting to invite you.
Yeah, Anthony. I'm hating. No. But
For real.
go ahead, Jonathan.
After that, yeah, guys, I'm Jonathan. I'm not Anthony, but I help people build wealth and use your bank as a partner. Catch me on TikTok. I'm actually almost to 1,000 on there, so any support there would be help. And um, Instagram at J Thomas Solution.
That was funny. He was like, and I'm Jonathan.
There's nothing you can do after that. Like you should have went last. He hurried up and put his music. I'm like, dog, I'm next. Like
Noted for next week. Anthony's gonna come on with the theme music, so he needs to go last. But anyway, all right. So let's get into it. So, if you didn't hear us before, the topic is online versus traditional banking. Does technology erase inherent bias? And that was brought up by Markia. So, Markia, go ahead and start us off with this.
Sure. So I suggested this topic back when I was still writing for Money Under 30, and I did an article on online versus traditional banking. And a lot of people don't understand that there is a difference in the two, and that the reason why online banking has become so popular is because people incorrectly assume, well, in my opinion, that the bias is kind of left out when it comes to online banking. They feel comfortable doing online banking because they don't have to pretend to be someone they're not when they go inside of a branch, right, and talk to somebody. They don't have to look a certain way or make a certain amount to get helped, which is a common theme for people who actually go inside banks and credit unions and stuff like that. So I thought it was a really interesting conversation when I had it. And I really wanted to get you guys' opinion on it because, as we all well know, being Black, like that's just like an automatic disqualifier for certain financial situations. And so, for you personally, do you believe that online banking kind of loses some of the inherent bias in the financial system for you? Like, do you think you'll have a better experience online banking versus traditional banking? In my personal opinion, I I believe that even with online banking, there is still some kind of bias. People made those systems and the systems that are used to make financial decisions. And unfortunately, people have these biases that they're not always conscious about. And I think that those personal biases often embed themselves in their work. And so that's why things like FICO, and things like that are still exclusionary to people who are born in certain situations. So I don't think that online banking erases that inherent bias that's in the financial system.
Thank you, Markia. And before I see a hand, Rahkim, but really quick, I just threw up a link to the Harvard implicit bias test. If you have not taken that, please go take that. Because as Markia said, there's biases that we don't even know exist in our brain just because this is how we have been programmed. And so the implicit bias test actually puts those biases to the forefront. And they have all types of things, from black, white, gay, straight, like all the different things you can think about, fat, skinny, we all have different biases. And that test is very, very eye opening. Really quick anecdote. When I took it, and y'all, I'm blackity black, 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 and I'm all about black. I love black people, black things. and all of that. And I was surprised by my results, just to be real. So definitely take that. I pinned it up at the top. If you're listening on the podcast, just search implicit bias test and it'll come right up. That's how I just got the link, but it's implicit.harvard.edu. All right, Rahkim.
Man, I'm mad you did that because I have like two more thoughts from what I was originally coming to say, but I'm gonna stay on task. Um, 10-year banking veteran here. Markia, your question, do I think that the difference between traditional and online eliminates some of that bias? I agree with you. I think the answer is no. And I have not personally used an online only bank per se, but I have, and I want to just jump right into it. I have had individuals reach out to me when I was writing for publications to kind of expose this narrative around banking black, specifically with the Greenwood bank that Killer Mike champions and helped to co-found, I believe, because it is not technically a traditional bank. It's like a fintech company that uses that brands itself as a bank and uses a third party company as an intermediary. And this individual was a black person who decided to open an account with this quote unquote bank and was really disappointed with the differences that existed from the traditional brick and mortar. Additionally, I would add that a big part of the banking experience outside of where you deposit and withdraw or transfer your money is the customer service piece. And so if we're looking at fintech companies or online only banks, there has to be a person on the other side of that phone oh, I can't talk today, or on the other side of the screen when you're chatting that has to interact with you, that has to look at how you spend your money, how much money is in your accounts. And so when we talk about bias, I think it's important first um to take the charge out of that word because I don't think bias in and of itself is a negative thing. But I think that when that bias is used to negatively impact somebody else or the object of that bias, that's when it becomes problematic. And whoever is sitting on the other side of that computer, whether they be another black person or a white person or an Asian person, their bias is going to impact what the span of control they exercise when it comes to customer service. And so I just think about my experience in the branch as a manager, and I'm not proud of this, but I think when I saw a black person coming into my particular branch, so I worked in a mass affluent, very white, very Jewish town. When I saw a black person come into the bank dressed a certain way, talking a certain way, with a check that kind of was like a little iffy, like maybe it was folded up and it looked a little crazy and they didn't have any accounts with us. I was programmed through the training to give them the side eye and to kind of and they under the guise of quote unquote due diligence be a little bit more vigilant in whether or not I was going to cash this check, what denominations or bills I was going to hand out to this customer, um, et cetera, right? There's a whole thing around it. And so I don't think that that goes anywhere. And I think that, and I like Tiffany said, I'm very pro blackity black black. And in championing, especially today, content that is inclusive, specifically of the black experience, I think that when we look at the financial institution as a whole, that although black people are disproportionately impacted negatively through our history with these institutions, it is the institution itself that has these bias, racist, white supremacist practices and ideals that impact us, and we're looking at it just through the lens of, oh, there's a white man on the other side or a white woman on the other side of this counter who has a bias against me.
That's good. And I'll get into a story after Jonathan and Anthony. But Jonathan?
Yeah, the short answer, kind of going on Rahkim's comments is, hey, because online is mostly, I mean, 90% electronic, you don't really have as much. So I would say they're a little bit more biased because it's making inferences based off um, what's what's been deemed to pose a risk. Now, from a banking just operation standpoint, I'll use myself as an example. I realized that your banking relationship, for me, and as somebody like you, Rakim, a decade plus in the financial services, ran many banks, and every place that you guys have probably visited, the the central point was for like a Bank of America, Wells Fargo, was cash or investment. The like an ally is still the same, but throughout all of them, they have different thresholds for what type of treatment you would be allowed, um, as far as fee reversals, all that type of stuff, based off how they deem your relationship. So the best example I could think of was like I use Ally for just the savings account because of that rate, the emergency fund, that type of thing. And so I'll leave some cash over there. I never moved it, uh, but when we bought a house, that was where we kept the money for the house. And typically, something like a wire fee to, I mean, that's a pretty standard thing in buying a house is you wire the money out. That would be charged. I knew because of the amount of money I had sitting there that I could not get that fee charged. The same thing could be said if I was at Bank of America. Because of what I have there, fees don't necessarily apply to me, even if it does happen for whatever reason. In the credit union, like Rakim was saying, when you come in with a check, yeah, there are a lot of things you can do, but a person is more, especially in the credit union, they're more definitely looking at how often are you coming here and how many times have I seen you experienced here. Meaning, if they don't come often and then they're handing you a check to a bank that looks a little funny, yeah, I'm not going to give you the benefit of doubt. But if I'm seeing you every other week and yeah, your checks come from all over, I'm more likely to give you that ready-made funds today. You're not going to get that same treatment in online bank because typically you're probably going to do some sort of mobile deposit, and all mobile deposits by law have standard hold procedure. Yeah, could they release it? Yeah, they could, but that's inherently going to put them more at risk. Truth be told, it's the same thing with lending. I wouldn't particularly get something online from a bank I couldn't go into if I was struggling, trying to get credit, all those type of things from an online bank, because there's no way someone can really determine if you would be a valid, more qualified person, even if you're not as strong on paper. Because when you're there, you can kind of, especially, and I use the credit union because there's a lot more kind of ambiguity in how they're doing their lending. But a lot of that is what were you able to ascertain from this person that is not on their credit report or is not showing up in their income?
But Jonathan, real quick, sorry to jump in front of everybody else, but I just feel like I don't know, it sounds like a rebuttal, and so I could be wrong, but the direction that I was going with my statement was more around, what we're talking about as far as implicit bias and, the way that a particular demographic, and that demographic being Black people, could be profiled and treated in, the online versus the traditional environment. The direction it sounds like you're going, and I think that it's valuable for people who are not in or from the banking industry, but it sounds like you're talking about like the operational processes of the bank that kind of voids the experience of individuals, whether they be Black or white, and just kind of talks about, well, if you have money of this amount, or if you have a frequency or a relationship with the bank of this kind. But I think that's disingenuous in a way because it's erasing the very real experience of people who do experience bias, Black people specifically who experience bias, We know that if the playing field was equal for everybody, and everybody came in with the same amount of money or the same relationship, same frequency, whatever, that in a perfect world, kumbaya, like, yeah, everybody would be treated equally, but that's not the case. And so, I don't want us to get lost in bank operations and bank standards versus to erase or minimize the experience of bias, particularly of Black people working, or rather trying to establish a relationship with these institutions.
Oh,
No, I was just more pointing out the differences. Yeah, I was speaking in just operation as somebody who ran the bank. I mean, I've experienced it even without the money. You know what I mean? I can go somewhere, somebody's going to treat me a certain way just because they think I don't have it. I don't walk in suited up, all that type of stuff to imply I have money. It's not until they see what I have till their tone may change. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that because I go places, cash a check that I have do no business with, and I can see how they're looking at me and what questions they're asking. It's only because I've been in the system and I understand the training of those that I already know what questions they're trying to ask, what they're trying to get answered, and why they're trying to do it with me. I already know that because I know, again, I've had to train these people, I've had to lead these people. I know what that looks like. I was just more pointing out the differences because as I heard the question was from online. The fact is you're not seeing anybody. Period. And whether or not you can be a valid qualified candidate, that will never come through. And at least if you're in person, you have a little bit more of an opportunity of having a chance, depending on where you go to do your banking. If you're doing it in your, like you said, if I'm from the hood and I try to go walk into an affluent area into a branch, I should be treated there. I should be treated the same, but I will be likely treated differently versus if I went to that same institution but just was in the hood where I'm from.
gotcha. Anthony, I know you had your hand raised. Did you still want to speak? Or
Yes. So one of the things that, if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's from the difference in understanding the biases between online but banking is different in person than it is online. And I think that having that online presence did one of the best things that I could say in our lifetime is allowing that access and opportunity for the Black and African American community to actually invest inside those banks. For one, because most of the time people are afraid of banks, especially our older generation, where the point they'll just tell you, hey, just go to the check cashing place down around the corner. That's what we used to do. And I used to do that too because that's all I knew. But it wasn't until I actually took the time to actually understand, like, oh, I can actually do this on my own and on a computer and actually can, do this remotely. It was a lot easier. It was less daunting for me to go inside the bank and didn't feel like I was being profiled the whole time. And I'm glad that Jonathan was able to iron out the differences of what the training looks like, because I didn't know that. From the banking side of the house, I didn't know because I've never been inside the banking industry or did on that opposite side. But it's good to understand the differences. But for me, I always felt weird going inside of a bank because usually they're the ones that get robbed that you hear about on TV. So, and I wonder, my other question, so now I'm thinking about it, is that are banks being robbed less because they're being online? And like physically robbed, not like digitally robbed and so forth. But that's a whole nother topic. But to get back to as far as being racially profiled or the experience of being a Black person investing into a bank, I have to say that it's a lot easier now to do that virtually than it does to actually worry about dealing with it physically. And now it's to the point I'm actually teaching my mom how to do things virtually because she still writes checks. And I'm like, no, you can stop writing checks now. So that's where I'm at. But we're getting there. Thank you.
all right, thank you. And I just wanted to bring up a point that I just thought about, and you all can kind of mull over before I go to and that is okay. If we're looking at online banking, right? Usually they have better rates, that type of thing. What about people that don't have access to online banking? Just something to think about. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, no, this is a great dialogue. So first and foremost, thank you for having me. I think this is my first time at this forum, and Tiff, I only know you from Twitter, so just going by your Twitter handle of Tiff. If there's another way to refer to you, please educate me on that. But I think all of you are bringing up some excellent points around systemic bias, right? And I think some of it is very, very foundational, right? And if you kind of apply first principles thinking to what what money is at its very core, it's a social contract. There is no intrinsic value to coins and currency except for that,
Something happened.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you? I may have been accidentally on mute. Did you catch a little bit of that? What I was saying is some of the bias, that I think we're talking about here is systemic and it's foundational, and it stems from, the very definition of money as a social construct. It doesn't have any intrinsic value, and its value has historically been, put into effect by central banks. And so, no doubt that, the bias that, and, various forms of isms that we've seen for centuries are ingrained within a lot of the practices. A lot of what you touched on also has to do with how risk is managed. And I think that's where, I think a lot of the bias has been further institutionalized because, again, the fundamental premise of credit is some people will be declined versus others. So there's actually a very interesting study that was just published around by the Federal Reserve. I guess some people from the Federal Reserve are co-authors of it, that talks about the asymmetry in distribution of credit card rewards, how the rewards are reaped by people that have high credit score versus otherwise. And if you now map that credit score back to various demographic classifications, including, race, of course, it disproportionately has an adverse impact on, Black and brown communities and women, unfortunately. And so, look, I can stay here all day and all night talking about one of the reasons that I, officially, I guess, had to throw in the towel and move into the fintech world, with the premise that we would create, a fairer system. Yeah, so pause there if people want to react to that and or have any questions, happy to answer those.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a question really quick because you said you're in the fintech space. Have you found that the regulations and stuff have hindered any of the progress that you are trying to make with making sure that your platform is, a level playing field? Because I'm not too familiar with that side of things, but I feel like there might be regulations and stuff that might hurt too.
Yeah, so I think, I think if you look at, the kind of people that are involved in fintech, and even, the lightning rod that is the blockchain. I think they tend to be more diverse. To your specific point on regulation, I mean, of course, a regulation is never a leading indicator. It evolves and co-evolves with the innovations that come forth. And so, so I think anything new, fundamentally will always have its critics, because, hey, even for our platform, Save Away, it has clearly no brand recognition, reinforced with millions of dollars of ad and brand spending that a large bank or a decent sized bank can have. So I think. So I think there's always a challenge with anything new, but I think the intention of the people that I think are moving to that space, are often, somewhat similar to that of mine, that who maybe have had a banking career, see the warts and see the systemic injustices, and and see that fundamental rethink is really necessary to bring justice back to the system. And it's never easy, right? I think adoption is clearly an important consideration, and as new things get adopted, there will always be anomalies to it. And I think so there is a lot of good stuff that's happening, in fintech, and lots of amazing projects. I don't want to make this an advertorial about what we're doing at Save Away, but feel free to take a look. So I mean, I think that the good intentions around creating a fairer and more financially inclusive system is definitely there. I think where, Tiff, to your point, the fault lines may appear in that is, for example, what you see with companies like Robinhood, for example, risk, the sort of growth at any costs, right? I think that is a clear risk. And I think the other risk and the other bias that I see, and a part of this stems from venture capital and how financial technology or fintech is getting funded. And I've seen that firsthand, raising capital for my own venture, which has to do with more, day-to-day saving that a lot of people, and again, disproportionately Black and brown people, don't have. Is there's a bias towards innovations that are all about investing, right? That are all about wealth. And so that begs the question: what happens to the much greater majority of people that don't have any of it? How do they find a path to prosperity? So anyhow, I'll stop the rant there, and don't know whether that addresses your question, Tiff. Even if not directly, maybe indirectly.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, Markia.
So, and I forgot who it was because I had walked away from my phone, but I heard somebody bring up like Greenwood and stuff like that. But I do have a question. So, with us, and by us, I mean Black people, with us kind of coming into our own and realizing that we no longer want seats at the table and we're creating our own spaces. And with the rise of Black owned this and Black owned that, with these Black owned credit unions that are popping up everywhere, and these alternative banking solutions that our community are creating, do we feel as though, do we feel that inherent bias as much in our communities that we're creating for ourselves? Is this something that we don't think we could weed out even if we have our own spaces? Or is this something that we could overcome, obviously not right now, right? But this is something that maybe we could kind of carve out for ourselves and run ourselves. And if you do believe that, what do you think would need to happen in order for that to be a successful option for us?
Thank you, Markia. And kind of why I brought up that regulation question too, because like even if we do build our own or what have you, we still have regulations that come from a federal level. So I've never done research on it. I think that's something I'm gonna do. But that's just something to think about to your point. If we do build our own and all of that, can we still erase biases even under a system that was made with biases, from the beginning? But anywho, Jonathan?
Yeah. Well, first, Markia's question is, I don't think the challenge. We talked about this, I think, in a couple platforms a couple weeks back. And my biggest argument was, number one, having a viable institution that could compete in, with the or be able to compete product, services, all those type of things, with what we have already in the marketplace. The second thing is, I think about it a lot. I think about it. I know the landscape, kind of like, I think the gentleman left, or OM was talking about, with blockchain. I had the opportunity to sit down with a fintech firm and understand how they're lending, and the ideal the piece about blockchain that is enticing, at least to me, is because it does remove kind of the middleman technology. I'm sorry, middleman piece, which is the bank, from even peer-to-peer lending. Like, there are platforms right now where you can actually lend your money for others. You can have your own terms, however you want, whatever interest rate. You can determine it based off the credit profile or just your particular preferences. But more of that activity going in, rather than you trying to get money from a source, but you got to go through the bank to get it. In terms of African American institution, my only concern is, I like the fact of more African Americans in a more African American institution, just because when you talk about the risk aspect, what I see as risk as a person who experienced growing up black, growing up from the hood, all that type of things, from another black person, I may not see it as risk, versus somebody, kind of like the whole cop example. If you have African American cops in the African American community, they may be less risky, or there may be less crime than if you put a white, Latino, Asian in that same community. Just because those people can identify with what's going on, and for them, it's not necessarily a danger, but it's a way to, oh, hey, you guys need to do it this way, or a lot of those problems probably could be educated or communicated out. The same thing I think could happen in the banking space. The only thing about the banking space is, because, like you mentioned, Tiff, with how the laws are, you it's very, very strict when lending, and when speaking about what you can do as a lender and what you cannot decline. So if we know inherently somebody's going to do something they qualify for, by law, I have to give it to them, even though it may hurt them financially. I can tell them, but I have to be very, very particular on how I tell them, because that in itself could be discrimination based on how the law is written.
Mm, okay. That brings up, I have so many more questions now, but I think Anthony was next. Or maybe Rahkim.
I think I was next, but if Anthony wants to go, I'll let him go.
No, you can go ahead, sir.
To Markia's question, I think, first of all, I think it's a powerful question because there's so many layers there, right? When we're looking at how we model behaviors, particularly economic behaviors, through these banking systems. And so my initial kind of like unfiltered reaction is no. Like it's not going to be a difference. We're going to do the same thing because we still have to participate in, this capitalist system. And to Jonathan's point, if we do establish um like a bank, then we are kind of beholden to the regulations and et cetera that dictate what that governing body looks like. So I think, thinking deeper rather into the question, it would be an exercise of, I think, a combination of imagination, an extreme imagination, getting everybody on the same page and looking into maybe what cultural practices we had prior to this dominant economic system, and pulling from that to determine how it is that we would want to circulate and establish wealth for ourselves, um outside of what that system looks like, or at the very least, what are the tweaks that we can make on a surface level that make this process more our own. And so I always make reference to this book when we get into talking about like the socialization of Black people and the interactions between Black people. From whatever institution we're looking at, and it's the miseducation of the Negro. I think that should be required reading, because there's the issue of not feeling like something for us by us is good enough or is as good as the Bank of America's, the Chases, etc. And then there's the issue of being socialized to emulate those systems and those processes in our own behaviors. And so I think what could happen, what likely would happen if there wasn't those variables that I mentioned, the imagination, the pulling from cultural references, the getting everybody on the same page, is that we would just create a carbon copy of what already exists in blackface. And so in a lot of ways that does more harm than good, because now we're perpetuating the system of white supremacy and capitalism onto Black people, from Black people, under the guise of helping Black people, if that makes any sense.
Hmm. Yeah, it does. It has me thinking, thinking a little deep. And real quick,
And
oh, go ahead, Jonathan.
well, it was that was kind of where I was at least attempting to go, Rahkim, because that was something I had just did a piece earlier this week about like the peer-to-peer lending. I'm like, hey, I know we always talk about building wealth for our kids and passing down that generational wealth and um uh what you talk about having trust wills, all that type of stuff. But also the fact of what if our wealth, what if our ability to have wealth puts us in a position where, hey, my kid, I have the wealth, but my kid still wants to, he doesn't necessarily want to um, take my money. Hey, I can lend it to you, but at least I can lend it to you under terms that I agree to and I control what those terms are versus you're getting your money from a bank, saying the institution, and they'll just come rip you out the house if you don't pay.
Gotcha. And I just wanted to really quick reset the room because it's a lot of new faces and I don't want them lost on what we're talking about. So up at the top, you can see a pinned tweet from Markia, and we're talking about online versus traditional banking. Does technology erase inherent bias? And so if you have any comments, questions, anything you want to add, feel free to request speaker privileges and we will get you up here. All right, Anthony.
Yeah, I actually done lost my thought because I'm so lost in the conversation, because it's interesting of understanding, like, having all these Black institutions, does it really impact the way how we're going to operate? One, yes, it's a possibility, but two, if you're trying to erase generations of the way how the market was actually trained, taught, and operated, we're going to still run into those same problems. I mean, happens. There are examples in multiple different extremes. You can pick one out of a hat and you can get something. But the matter of the fact is that at least we tried. And so that's one of the things that I have to say, that, giving up is the point of it all, is just really giving up. You're retiring that particular idea. So I think by us keeping this conversation alive and really taking a deep dive into a different approach into how can we move forward as a unit, as a team, and as a people, regardless of the stigmatisms around the teachings that we were brought up in, to actually now let's take it into our understanding, like, hey, we can actually read things on our own. We have our own thought processes. Yes, we can do our own research on how the previous generation did it. So let's go ahead on and start looking forward on how we can actually move the narrative instead of just dwindling in the past. So, do you go out and support or invest in these Black institutions that are coming up? Or do you just kind of ignore them? Me personally, I'm taking a shot, and I've been banking with a Black bank for over 2 years now. And they got their hiccups, they got their issues, but I'm trying my best to lean in with them. I do call them if I have some issues, but they've been willing and able to make those changes that I need to get the funding that I needed. So, so when you bank with me or buy anything from my shop, it goes directly to a Black bank before it goes to any other bank. So that's the way how I operate. And I try to make sure to spend more money. I know Markia said I was the biggest consumer, but I try to make sure it goes back into another Black person's pocket before I even go to another institution. So that's my piece on that one. But I just think that we all have a place in this society to play. It's just depending on if we're willing to lean into it and take it to the next level.
I feel you. You had requested speaker, so I think you want to go again.
Well, no, I think this is, really inspiring dialogue. So I'm very thankful to be a part of it. And I think this is, also really how what change looks like. So absolutely, I think having, banks that are founded by, a management committee and a senior leadership that is entirely Black and that is causing the deposits and the lending, which is really, in part what a bank does, making sure that it is, happening within the community is one of the equalizing forces. And one of the things to keep in mind here is that, since you brought up regulation, you have to understand that the banking system is a highly consolidated a market structure. And by that, I mean, right, if you look at, let's say, deposit market share, the large banks between themselves and the large banks being defined by, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citi, between themselves have about 60-70% of market share. And, and if you look at other credit instruments, since I know we were talking about lending, credit cards, for example, the same thing. So I think the reason why I bring it up is, regulation is, even though it may, the principle around it is justice, it is subject to high levels of lobbying by these extremely powerful giant organizations that control trillions of dollars of deposits and loans. And, I have, very firsthand experience of this, everything from, a EEOC case, within a bank where, someone was being denied a promotion on grounds that didn't make sense, and and the best wisdom received from a person of color in the senior leadership team was it would be almost futile to bring a EEOC case because when it goes to court, that's highly controlled and lobbied, by these banks that have a lot of lobbying abilities. So, so that's part of what I think you have to keep in mind is that change happens small, and things that were once small, when we cultivate them, become become a force of nature. And but yeah, it is really fighting against the beast. And I think I'll just pause there, and hope that sheds a little bit of context there.
Yes, thank you. All right, and Jay?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jay Stevens of My Wealth Journey LLC. And I always love this space. I wanted to chime in to provide a little perspective on the topic. I do think that there's inherent bias that can be eliminated by using technology. But I also wanted to present the counter argument that the people that develop that technology, they have their biases. And so as much as we like to use algorithms and we like to use AI that help us do things, as much as our group loves to talk about Jasper, there is still the limitation that if you have a programmer who has some type of bias, whether it's racism, sexism, any of that, in what they are and who they are, as they write that code, it shows up. And there have been studies done that show just because they're trying to develop a system that levels the playing field, if they are writing the code that builds in that or that includes that bias in there, you still kind of have to in some way overcome that. And it's not to say throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, I'm not saying we should not use other technology and we shouldn't consider these platforms, but it's just the balance of it all. And all the more reason why we need more diverse coders and all of us in STEM in some way helping out with this area. And Markia, shout out to you for a really great topic this evening. That's it.
Thank you. You brought up some really good points. So I'm glad that you did bring that up. Did anybody else want to chat about this topic before we wrap up? It's coming up on 10 o'clock. And while you all are thinking, since Jay brought up Jasper, I'm going to go ahead and throw my affiliate code up there. So if y'all check it out, please support your creator. So anyway, anybody else want to chat about this topic? While you all are thinking about that, I'll go ahead and give my story that I was going to give early on in the conversation. And that is, I had spoke to a guy that worked in the banking industry. And he told me, he was like, one time, well, probably a few times, but he told me about a specific incident where he looked over a person's application and stuff. And this was before online banking really got popping. So this was like in person. He looked over a person's stuff. Their application looked really good. He sent it to his manager to get the final approval. And the manager denied it, even though he should have gotten approved. And what he realized and why he left the banking industry was that, in the break rooms and stuff, they were on, okay, is this person a person of color based on their application? Like, so they were like really trying to figure out if these people, based on how they spent their money, what they spent it on, how they saved, all that type of stuff, they were making bets in the break room on whether these people were of color or not. So I thought that was very interesting and eye-opening for me. That's never been in the banking industry. So that just ties into our topic of the inherent biases, even whether it's in person or online. Like, I think it was Jonathan or Markia or somebody said, there's still somebody on the other side, or it might have been Rahkim. There's still somebody on the other side of that. And so, just to think about, leave you with some thoughts if nobody else wants to go on, your implicit biases, your inherent biases, making sure that you're aware of those, in just your everyday life, because these people, they were just at work thinking it was normal, like, they having fun or what have you, but not realizing that this affects somebody's life and livelihood. And I see you do have your hand up, Mauli.
Mowley.
Yes.
You got it. You got it. What's going on, everyone? I know it's been a while. Mildly voting with financially present. Thanks for the conversation. And there were a lot of things that were talked or touched on. And when I think about the traditional banking versus the digital age we live in, it is an uphill battle. Because when I think of when I was a licensed stockbroker, there were times when people would open up an account and you wouldn't be able to, actually, they would start the application, but you couldn't finish it. And you would have to print out a letter and give it to them. And really what it meant was their credit score was below a certain amount. So it was a standard protocol. You give them the letter and say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not able to open up an account. You just call the number there. And then I also think back to the neighborhoods that they put these branches in, these brokerage offices in. They understand IXI data. They look at zip codes. We all know about redlining. There's a reason why these institutions are in certain places. And they, like mentioned, they are heavily entrenched in the culture and the fiber of this country. And in order for us to, bank with people that look like us and park our money there, we have to do a couple of things. And we have to step aside from the cultural norms that we've been coached into. We also have to set aside our own biases, based on white supremacy. But then also we have to manage our own risk and say, hey, well, how much of, my money am I going to put with that bank? I just want to test them out. You want to dip your toe in, because there are people that, whatever color anyone is, there are scammers out there. So, and I know for me, I proceed with caution, and I'm going to assess the risk by finding a way to diversify where I put my funds. And this is not to knock anybody's business at any point, but it's like there are several layers of difficulty when it comes to breaking these barriers. And it doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just means that it is a lot of work. And sometimes your knee-jerk reaction is like, no. But then, once you look at certain things and maybe you maybe attain a certain risk level, you can say, okay, yeah, I can start banking with this newer bank that I'm not familiar with. Or yeah, maybe I will bank with an online bank that I'll probably never ever see, but they'll manage my money because they are under these regulations and under FDIC insurance and so and so. And there is a lot to digest with all of that. But all of that to say is it's an uphill battle. Doesn't mean that it can't happen, but it does require a big culture shift and a lot of change management, I would say, for every household, basically. And the idea of fintech being added along adds a different layer of urgency. It's not like we can kind of wait for this to happen culturally. It almost needs to be more aggressive in the sense that, hey, it's a race against the clock. Well, we know blockchain can replace a lot of banks. But I say all that to just try and touch multiple points. And thank you guys for the conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for that. You brought up some really good points to where I'm thinking we might have to do a banking part 2, because there's some other things that I definitely want to hit on based on what you said just now. So stay tuned, y'all. We might do a banking part 2. But thank you all so much for coming on tonight. We are at the end of the hour, so we appreciate you all coming. This is Fin Noir, a space for Black money talk. We do this every Monday night at 9 p.m. It's just a place where we can talk about different topics as it relates to Black people and money. So thank you all for coming. Please make sure you follow our speakers up here at the top, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening, joining, and being a part of the Money Talk with Tiff podcast this week. You can check Tiff out every Thursday for a new Money Talk podcast. But if you just can't wait until next week, you can listen to previous podcast episodes at moneytalkwitht.com or follow Tiff on all social media platforms at Money Talk with T. Until next time, spend wise by spending less than you make. A word to the money wise is always sufficient.